Okay, I think those waiting have been admitted. And then as it goes, we'll have additional guests with us in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes. But welcome to everybody. I'm Jeff Gedman with American Purpose. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. We have a fabulous conversation partner and a very important conversation in these next 57, 58 minutes. Peter Berkowitz, whom virtually everybody on this call, on the Zoom knows, is a distinguished scholar, political scientist. He's also been a senior government official in the last administration in the Pompeo State Department. He was director of policy planning. He has been and is with the Hoover Institution, Stanford. He has published widely on a number of topics, but including an ongoing topic, the subject of liberalism, from a number of different vantage points. I'll note one book, Virtue, Making of Liberalism, Princeton University Press. I think it's 1999, if my memory serves.
Long time ago.
Well, how about that? You were on to something then, Peter, and then here we are in 2021. You had your finger on the pulse of things. I noted, and will note for all of you, Peter's recent essay for Mosaic on liberalism, the tensions within, and look at the United States and Europe and Israel. And if my colleague Michelle High has a chance, I'll ask her to put that essay into chat. If you haven't read it, I commend it to you. And so with that, and other things. I mean, Peter, I could spend the whole hour introducing you. You're also the recipient of the 2017 Bradley Prize and other things. So Peter Berkowitz, thank you for your time and welcome, and it's great to see you. So that's first order of business. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
And then to the matter at hand, you all, as we often do in these Zoom discussions, I'm going to play the role of moderator today. I'm going to ask Peter a handful of questions based on his recent work. We will go 15, 20 minutes-ish, but I want to open it up to the gallery as soon as possible because we are good in quantity and quality today. You see who's here, and we want to hear from you. But Peter, after that introduction, scene setting, let's just dig right in. If it's the case that people of goodwill want to see that we can overcome the worst aspects of polarization in American life today, it seems to me that one of the problems we often have in Washington is rushing to the conclusions or the prescriptions before we're clear on the diagnosis. So could we start there in a very foundational way? If we're talking about a crisis,
So I'm sorry, you're muted.
If we're talking about the challenge today to liberalism and to liberal democracy, Peter, what is the problem? What is, in essence, the problem that we're trying to manage or solve, if you will?
Well, again, Jen, thanks very much for this opportunity. It's great to be in conversation with you. One way of characterizing the problem is this. We speak of social tensions, we speak of polarization, but increasingly what we're encountering is genuine loathing by a significant part of the left for the right, and a genuine loathing by a significant part of the right for the left. This seems to me the crux of the problem, deeper than an ordinary polarization. Where does this come from? Well, what is important right now to the right, to conservatives? And we saw this come into focus with the candidacy, the unlikely candidacy, still more unlikely presidency of Donald Trump. We saw as the right is dissatisfied with trade deals, with, and I think it's important here to emphasize, illegal immigration, not in the first place, immigration. And finally, and this sometimes in some circles gets lost, anger with elites in Washington, New York, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, whom they perceive to be dictating the one true vision of morality, the one correct political agenda. Meanwhile, there are real discontents on the left as well. I suppose we can distill that set of discontents by saying that a significant segment of the left is appalled by the extent to which inequalities still prevail in the United States, and believes that hardly is anything more urgent than addressing through aggressive public policy those inequalities. Those agendas are in tension and conflict. Many of the differences of opinion now among commentators about the challenges that liberal democracy faces have to do with who's more at fault, the right or the left. And of course, on the left, the view tends to be that the right is exclusively at fault. And on the right, the view tends to be that the left is exclusively at fault. For the moment, I want to say only this, that it seems to me that over the last several decades, the left has been the aggressor. But by which I mean, the left, the progressive left, is determined through social policy to control more and more aspects of social and political life, beginning, let's say, with education. Whereas the wish of the right tends to be, and I'm happy to elaborate, not to be controlled. So both sides are angry. Both sides are very angry. But it seems to me the anger on the right tends to be reactive, a desire not to be controlled. And by the way, to foreshadow maybe other parts of our conversation, I see actually hope in that prospect, because even though many critics on the left see the problem with the right as an incipient or not so incipient, a increasingly crystallized authoritarianism, it seems to me that what we see is more of a desire to be left alone, to have more control over borders, over trade deals. In other words, it's an expression of still a deep-seated American commitment to freedom. And it does seem to me that the more we understand the debates in the United States, as debates about the meaning of freedom, the more we will find grounds for conducting our debates reasonably and in tempered fashion. Stop there.
So Peter, thank you. So let's take for a moment left and let's take for a moment right in that order. So one thing one hears these days is the collocation, if that's the right word, illiberal liberalism, a phenomenon on the left that is often described as intolerant. And you mentioned education, prizing inclusivity over academic freedom and freedom of speech. Could you speak to that a little bit? Talk to us about what you've described as a more aggressive agenda of the left in culture, and in particular in the area of education.
Yes, happy to do so. Use the phrase illiberal liberalism in a fine essay that appeared in the American Purpose that you and I were talking about a few minutes ago, Frank Fukuyama's Liberalism and Its Discontents. In speaking about discontents on both the right and the left, he characterizes left-wing discontents. He characterizes these people as progressive anti-liberals. My friend Gadi Taube, who's written a book, it's not yet been translated into English. Hebrew, it's called Nayadim v'Nayachim, mobiles and sedentaries. He speaks of these people as the mobiles. He gives them a sociological definition. These are people, actually, like us, we're included in this group, whose work takes us places, whose work tends to be writing, analysis, symbolic analysis, our earlier commentators spoke of. It brings us into contact with people, not only in different parts of our country, people around the world, and it shifts our allegiances, from nation state in the first place to a more internationalist orientation. Okay, so the progressive elites, it seems to me, have indeed gained control over the educational system. But I don't agree that that the tension is between greater inclusivity and greater academic freedom, or greater focus, let's say, on training and skills, acquisition of knowledge. Because I think what we've seen over the years, over the decades, is that inclusivity and diversity, and now equity, don't mean what they don't mean in the educational world and the moral and political world what they mean in ordinary language. Increasingly, the quest for diversity in education means people with different skin colors and genders and ethnicities who agree about a certain political agenda. Inclusivity means excluding people who dissent from that agenda. Equity does not mean equal treatment. It rather means unequal treatment based on race, ethnicity, or gender. This is said explicitly by Ibram X. Kendi and other of the leading lights of the educational world these days. So my own view is that it's urgent to return to old-fashioned liberal education. By the way, when I say old-fashioned, I don't mean to suggest, as some people think, that everything was hunky-dory in the 1950s or the 1930s or the 1890s. But there is an older understanding, never perhaps lived up to, often betrayed, but still an older understanding that I think we should return to. That is, the proper liberal education, properly understood, is indeed inclusive. It welcomes everybody. Liberal education is truly diverse. It excludes nobody on the basis of any irrelevant characteristics. And in protecting, you mentioned academic freedom, freedom of speech, it gives everybody the opportunity to hear a range of opinions, acquire knowledge, and develop their ability to think for themselves.
Peter, thank you. I have one more, at least one more, and I do want to open it up in minutes and moments. Let's talk about the right's role in this and the predicament in which we find ourselves. So this week, Tucker Carlson, as many of you know, is in Budapest and seeing Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. And Peter, as you well know, for one group, Viktor Orban is the right to the wrongs. In shorthand, someone who is for controlled borders, for sovereignty, for identity and traditional family, for a checking of the progressive agenda in educational and social affairs, abortion, LGBTQIA, and so forth. For another group, though, Viktor Orban is a power centralizer and consolidator, a practitioner of crony capitalism, and someone who is constricting independent media, civil society, and courts. You can take on, if you wish, the real Viktor Orban, whom you know, and how you assess this character, because he plays a role beyond Hungary, as we see. Others make a kind of pilgrimage to Budapest, Pat Dianne and so forth. But even more to the point, I'd be curious to hear from you about what role conservatives are playing in getting us to this impasse. And is it possible that in some cases, cures are worse than the disease?
It's almost, given any particular problem, it's almost always possible to find a supposed cure that is worse than disease, first of all. Second, it seems to me that conservatism's historic role, or I should say, this is itself a huge discussion. What is American conservatism? From my point of view, the historic role of the best in American conservatism has always been to call America back to the finest in its constitutional traditions. The finest in its constitutional traditions means its founding principles, natural freedom and equality of all human beings, and limited government grounded in the consent of the governed, the principal purpose of which is to secure individual freedom equally for all. That's the best of the American constitutional tradition. We didn't always live up to our ideals. Everybody knows that we gave legal sanction to the wicked institution of slavery at the founding. All that's true. All that has to be reckoned with. But it seems to me, again, the historic job of conservatism is always to call us to finest ideals and institutions and preserve what's best. What's the great danger for conservatism? In a way, it's the same great danger, although it receives different expression, for the left, to turn one's back on America's founding principles. So we'll take the complex case of Orban in Hungary. It is possible to answer your question, which is the true Orban. I'm not going to say which is the true Orban, but it's possible that both are the true Orban, by which I mean it's possible that we can learn from Orban and even admire his insistence on the importance of the nation state, which after all, people forget this. They treat the nation state as if it's sometimes as if it is in contradiction with the defense of rules-based international order or the great post-World War II settlement. But of course, the fundamental political unit on which the United Nations is based is the nation state. The fundamental political unit on which the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is based is the nation state. I mean, it begins with an affirmation of the dignity and fundamental rights of all individuals, but the fundamental political unit is the nation state. So that's fine. It's even good in this particular moment. And it seems to me every nation state has a right to control its own borders. What one can be inspired by Orban there. And it also seems to me that it's true that a healthy liberal democracy is a liberal democracy that is in touch with the best of its own traditions and appreciates the role of the family, of civic association, intermediate associations in supporting freedom. One can also deplore any moves that undercut individual rights, any moves that undercut due process, any moves that interfere with the basic practices of freedom, freedom of speech. In other words, we have to, just as we can distinguish the virtues and vices of our personal friends, we can distinguish the strong points and weak points of various friends, partners, and nation states around the world.
So Peter, thank you. You all, it's 12:22 Eastern, and I feel like my job, Peter is hard at work, but my job as backup band or warm-up band is done. And I think that the worthy thing is to hear now from the gallery, because we have such a fabulous, distinguished group today. So I'd like to open it up to discussion, questions, comments on what you've heard from Peter and on his recent article in Mosaic. So the floor is open. You can press the button to raise your hand, or you can wave at me through the screen. And if I fail to see you, Michelle is good at telling me, Jeff, you've overlooked. And so John Rauch, your hand is up. John, good to see you. Congratulations on your newest book, John from the Atlantic and Brookings. And John, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you, Jeff, for having me. I'm here in my capacity as official Peter Berkowitz groupie. I think I've probably read everything you've ever written that was not in Hebrew. And I owe Peter public as well as private thanks for helping with my book. He did some marvelous reading and comments on several chapters. Peter, as you may or may not be aware, about a month ago, I did a debate with Andrew Sullivan on his podcast about which is the bigger threat, the MAGA right or the woke left. And the nature of that argument was we agreed that there were illiberal and liberal members of both sides' coalition. And we agreed that it would be a very good thing for the liberal parts of both coalitions, left and right, to come together against various threats. And we agreed that the threats, the illiberal problems on both the left and the right, were really quite worrisome. Where we disagreed was which was worse. He argued that the left is, at least in the long run, significantly more of a threat because it's so ideological, with a kind of neo-Marxist structure, and because it has captured the commanding heights of the culture, which is to say academia, media, now employers, and it's training an entire generation. And in his view, it's really almost too late to do anything about it. My view was quite different, which is that the MAGA right, it may not be as ideological, but it is deeply illiberal. It is headed toward the open embrace of violence and minority rule in politics. It controls its own media organizations and the Republican Party, and now the Republican base, and shows very little regard ultimately for liberal values. So I argue that that is much the most important threat. I'm gathering from what you've said here and elsewhere that you agree with Andrew more, but I wonder if you could talk a bit to this, the way we're framing it, whether you think it's accurate and how you come out. Sorry about the long question.
Thank you for the excellent question. It's wonderful to see you, Jonathan. Congratulations on the book. And thank you for the eloquently put question. Yes, it's true. We don't always have to determine which is the very worst. We could agree that they're two grave threats, but nevertheless, I'll take the challenge, and I will tell you that your suspicion is correct. I think Andrew is closer to the mark. I agree. Well, let me begin with the right, though. Especially after December 14th, when President Trump failed to acknowledge the undoubted legal reality that the states had certified the votes, and that whatever cheating there might have been, whatever fraud there might have been, was no longer legally relevant because under the Constitution, federal law, states had certified. And therefore, it was only left to Congress to count. We saw very worrisome developments. But if I look at the forces that brought Trump to power, and I look at how he governed, how did he govern, really? Well, it was actually, he stood for a fairly traditional Republican agenda. He cut taxes. He deregulated. He appointed, not as some people have said, suggested, right-wing political hacks to the bench, but generally and for the most part, he appointed conservative judges who, and we have to be clear about this, generally for the most part, what distinguishes conservative judges is their insistence. I don't say that they always adhere to this, but nevertheless, what distinguishes them is their insistence that it's the job of the judge to rule in accordance with the Constitution's original meaning and not enact their political agenda. Left liberal judges have a different view of the judicial role. it's not easy. It is easy to quarrel with this Trump administration policy or that Trump administration policy. Easy. And obviously legitimate. It's easy to criticize many aspects of how Donald Trump governed. It's less easy to identify the constitutional rights that he invaded. People talk about freedom of speech. Yes, Donald Trump said many nasty things about the press, but I wonder whether there's ever been a moment in human history in which a press more vociferously and round the clock condemned the top political official in the land, and by the way, profited greatly from it. Check out revenues at New York Times and CNN over the 4 years of Trump's presidency. So while yes, I worry about authoritarian trends, especially, by the way, John, among the intellectuals, I worry about integralism. I worry about those nationalist conservatives who believe the answer is to replace the commitment to fundamental freedoms and limited government with a commitment to this abstraction called the nation. In my book, at the core of the American nation is a commitment to freedom. I worry about the enthusiasm among right-wing intellectuals for Patrick Deneen's book, Why Liberalism Failed, a book that argues that modernity went wrong with John Locke, and we need to the extent possible, replace it wholesale. I worry about that, but I emphasize that it still seems to me that what brought Donald Trump to power, what kept him in power, was not the desire for more authoritarianism in the center, was the desire to be left alone and not to live under a set of rules and moral understandings emanating from Washington. If I could just, I've gone on for a long time now, but I should say something also to bolster Andrew's claims about the left. I think he's absolutely right about the institutionalization of the left and what did you say, the commanding heights of culture. Yes, Silicon Valley, yes, Hollywood, Wall Street today, yes, literary centers, mainstream press and media. But there's another area that we shouldn't forget, the federal bureaucracy. The federal bureaucracy. Just only recently, Secretary of State Blinken announced a new office for diversity and inclusion, which tasks every single member of the State Department, to engage in the mission critical task, mission critical term of art within the State Department, of promoting diversity and inclusion. In my observation, these are lofty terms and good terms. I'm for a diverse workforce, and I'm for including all Americans in the opportunities to work in the State Department. And I believe that the American diplomatic corps benefits when Americans from all walks of life and a variety of backgrounds serve. But in my experience, as I've already indicated, an Office of Diversity and Inclusion will be in the job of dividing the State Department on the basis of race, ethnicity, and gender. It will be in the business of not only, it has said it will be in the business of asking every member of the State Department to do what he or she can do to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it says that the new initiative says that one criterion in hiring, retention, and promotion is an individual's contribution to promoting greater representation along the lines of race, ethnicity, and gender, which means now everybody in the State Department is asked as a mission critical matter to focus on these matters, not to focus on tasks at hand. I'm all in favor of insisting in the State Department that every member be treated with equal respect. This will improve diplomatic corps, and it will allow excellence in the knowledge of languages, excellence in the understanding of technology, which will allow us better to compete with China and more to rise to the top. Anyway, I got a little off track, John. I'm sorry, but the point was in addition to control of the commanding heights, I do believe also the federal bureaucracy, not only in the State Department, also is embracing as an orthodoxy sensibility. And I want to be clear here. My point right now is not to rail against progressivism in general. My point is to object to institutionalizing it as orthodoxy in a variety of public and private institutions. I'll stop there.
So Peter, thank you. So I've got Patrick, Wilson Shirley, Michael, Bill Galston, Kate. We're coming to all of you right now. Be patient. I will say, John, if I don't see you right now on my screen, we congratulated you on your new book.
Yes.
Let me just hold it up here. I'm not good at Zoom on holding these things up, but it's called Constitutional Knowledge, Brookings Institution University, or Brookings Institution Press, 2021. And John, it was great to be able to host you on the book earlier this summer. So I felt it was important to say that. Patrick, you have the floor, and I know who you are, and most do, but tell us who you are.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, I am on the editorial board of American Purpose, and I teach at Stanford. Peter, I don't think I probably read all of your books like Jonathan, but I read a few. And I remember that for you, one question was whether conservatism was part of American liberalism or something different, or at least there was within conservatism some aspects that were part of the, American liberal tradition in the sense of Louis Hartz, etc. And then another part which was different. Now, my question is about, what your thinking is about the aspect of conservatism that has been called populism. It's not only conservatism, of course, but we have talked about Viktor Orban, we have talked about Trump in the last few minutes, and you have not mentioned the term populism, which has been extremely popular. So how do you connect it with conservatism? Is it just a style, or is it something else?
Thanks for the question. Very important. So first, we should note that as a common matter, the term populism is bandied about to designate whatever majority you're opposed to. It's odd for populism to be, at least on its face, seen as a bad thing in a democracy in which the job of of candidates who wish to be elected is to gather a majority. But of course, populism does have a more precise meaning. What do we mean by populism? Usually what we mean by it is a group of, think of them as ordinary people who are united in opposition to elites. That's populism. And we can add that the American founders, the American constitutional tradition, is grounded in worries about popular majorities, ordinary people. The American constitutional government incorporates into fundamental institutions a wide variety of checks and balances to control, channel, elevate popular will. Okay. But the second point is this. We tend to think of the rise of populist conservatism the alliance between the Republican Party and populist, Republican Party under the leadership of Donald Trump, populism, as a new phenomenon. It is not a new phenomenon. In fact, it's a phenomenon as old as modern conservatism. What do I mean? Really, before the modern era, there was hardly something you could call self-conscious conservatism, because the default option for everybody was to pass down inherited traditions. That changes with modern freedom, where for the first time in a systematic way, freedom comes under attack. So really the first self-conscious modern conservative, although he doesn't call himself a conservative, is Burke. Why do I call him the first modern conservative? Because he understood his task to be conserving freedom. This is the theme of reflections on the revolution in France. We got bad ideas from over there in Paris, but the situation here in England is good. Our institutions are healthy. We do not need their ideas. We don't need new ideas. In fact, we don't even need to, most people don't need to engage in high study, but they don't have to go to the universities. Reflections involves a eloquent defense of the basic morality of the common man in England, the common moral sensibility. That's healthy. And I won't run through all of American conservatism, but I will just now make the assertion, offer the assertion that something similar is true of Hayek, limited government, or libertarian conservatism. Similarly for Russell Kirk, William F. Buckley, Irving Kristol eventually, all argued against the elites and saying, we've got a healthy understanding of moral and political life. And where is it? It exists among the people. Now, that's not to say that the alliance today is a healthy one, because we cannot say, and conservatives don't, or tend less to say today, that ordinary people are now simple, unreflective embodiments of decency, good judgment, commitment to American principles. The middle of the country, working class is a troubled class now. So I'll summarize my answer in this way. The alliance between conservatism and populism is a common one, both in the American tradition of conservatism and in modern conservatism more generally. In my judgment, the best of American conservatism is devoted to conserving America's founding principles, constitutional traditions, which are classically liberal. And finally, these principles, rightly understood, give room to both conservative concerns about cultivating virtue, defending the family, recognizing the legitimate boundaries of the nation state, and give room for democratic reforms to bring the country ever more closely in line with its fundamental promise of equality under law.
So Peter and Patrick, thank you very much. Patrick, as you'll see in chat, if you didn't know already, has written for us recently on understanding of and challenges to liberalism in France. And so I want to call on Wilson Shirley and Michael Allen. This isn't perfectly elegant, but I'm watching the clock. I'm going to pair you two, if you could both be succinct, and then we'll go to Bill, and then we'll go to Kate, and we'll see where we are. Wilson, if you would identify yourself, please. You've written for us too recently. Just mention the book review and then ask your question.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yes, I wrote a book review that Michelle did a great job editing on 2034, a new book. But it's good to see you, Peter.
Good to see you, Wilson.
I was wondering if you could connect your discussion of, I apologize for not having read your piece yet. As we've discussed, Mosaic has a robust paywall.
I'll send it to you.
I was wondering if you could connect your discussion of liberalism to geopolitical competition with China and how you view liberalism as an asset in that competition.
So Peter, hold your fire just one
Yeah.
moment. Let's hear from Michael Allen, and seeing where Wilson ended up, Michael may even build on to that, but whatever you like. Michael, you have the floor. Michael, you're muted.
Michael Allen with the National Endowment for Democracy, but speaking in a purely personal capacity. Your reference to Burke, Peter, reminded me of, because I don't have much of a social life, I was recently reading a book about trade union banners, labor movement banners in early 20th century Britain. And it was quite striking that, of course, there were occasional references to socialism and solidarity and so on. But there are also more prevalent references to temperance and education and diligence and even to the empire. And it struck me that really those, what used to be the traditional values of the left, were very much aligned with working class values of solidarity and so on. But as the left's social basis has shifted, as it's become more college educated, professional, public sector, dare I say bourgeois, those values have become clearly much more cosmopolitan. So the question is really, is the left's, do you agree that the left's agenda has changed as its social basis has changed? And furthermore, isn't it really, I think as Robert Hughes said in The Culture of Complaint many years ago, the political correctness is really a reflection of the left's impotence because they've lost on the broader terrain. Nobody talks about socialism anymore. We have neoliberal hegemony, supposedly. Isn't the cultural hegemony, so to speak, compensation for the broader strategic defeat?
Shall I answer, Jeff?
Please.
So first to Wilson, my former colleague on the policy planning staff, I thank you for the softball question about China. I should mention that the policy planning staff produced a long paper called "The Elements of the China Challenge," to which Wilson made a valuable contribution, and I thank him here for it. So I'm delighted to draw the connection between the China Challenge and my remarks on liberalism, but specifically education. Somewhere in the Politics, Aristotle observes that no matter is more important to the preservation of a regime, and no matter tends to be more neglected than education. This seems to me to be correct, even as right now the United States were engaged in a robust debate about education. There's not enough time here to outline the scope of the China Challenge. Suffice it to say that I do believe with Secretary Pompeo that the China Challenge is our foremost foreign policy challenge. They're our foremost strategic competitor. It is a geopolitical competition, which is also a competition of ideas. It's unfolding in every region of the world. And in order to prevail in that competition, in order to secure freedom, it does seem to me it's absolutely essential for us to reform our schools, to develop schools that that provide a proper liberal education, by which I mean an education beginning in kindergarten, or these days before kindergarten, and culminating in college. And I do mean an education that fits our young citizens for freedom. This, of course, means that basic literacy, reading, writing, and arithmetic, understanding of America, for sure, its fundamental principles. And by the way, what's magnificent about them and the extraordinary achievements, and without sweeping under the rug any of our violations, even grotesque violations of those principles from the founding moment. But a serious reform of liberal education is absolutely essential. Otherwise, our citizens will neither have the skills and abilities to defend the United States, they won't understand why the United States is worth defending. So here the geopolitical and the domestic are inseparably connected. On the left, the lost left. It's an excellent question. It's a hard question to identify precisely why the left's focus has shifted, but it undoubtedly has shifted to the cultural issues. But I wouldn't speak only of impotence on the left. It seems to me that on the social and cultural issues, the left has enjoyed victory after victory on abortion, remains the law of the land. And by the way, according to public opinion polls, even in the event of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, I have no predictions on that matter. We know that 44, 45, 46, 47 states, including Alaska and Hawaii, will preserve roughly the abortion laws now in place. Affirmative action remains the law of the land. In the most dramatic example, for sure, Jonathan Rausch will help me on this, but I think let's go back all the way to 1985. It didn't even occur to most left-wing gay people that they were being deprived of a right, the right to marry. Thanks to the work, especially of two people, Andrew Sullivan and Jonathan Rausch. Many others were involved, but really what we're talking about is tremendous social change. Not only was same-sex marriage enshrined as a constitutional right in 2015, even if it hadn't been, all the trends in American society were pointing in one direction. So, not only were gays and lesbians and others, different sexual orientations, genders becoming more and more accepted, it was spreading in among conservatives as well. There was no doubt, really, that if the Supreme Court had not so ruled in 2015, within 5 or 10 years, I don't know how many, the vast majority of states would have recognized same-sex marriage as a right under state law. So on many of the cultural questions, I see victories, but with every additional victory, it seems there's an intensified anger, even fury about inequality in America. Yes, I do think we certainly need a party that focuses on solidarity. We need a party that looks out after the interests of working class people, and it may happen that party becomes the Republican Party.
So Peter Wilson and Michael, thank you for the questions in that round. Bill Galston, thank you for your patience. You have the floor.
Well, Peter, where to begin? I agree with you more than you think, but less than you'd like. Let me just, since you served in the State Department, this is not my main point. You'll probably be interested in the following statistics. At the beginning of the 21st century, African Americans made up 6% of the Foreign Service. After 2 decades of the 21st century had passed, African Americans made up 7% of the Foreign Service. It seems to me it is possible to understand why there's a certain impatience with the pace of diversification of the State Department. And I'm not in favor of the kinds of departments of diversity and inclusion that we've seen springing up everywhere, any more than you are. But it does seem to me, as a matter of common sense, that a greater focus on the diversification of a department whose business it is to deal with a predominantly non-white world would be in the interests of the United States and its foreign policy. So I would just like to put that on the table before moving on to my main point, which is this. You said early in your remarks that it is your impression that progressives have been on offense while others simply want to be left alone, right? The populist or conservative opposition. And that has a very interesting historical resonance, because in 1954, it was the liberals who were on offense. And of course, the defenders of the status quo simply said, we just want to be left alone to live according to our traditional way of life. It is always the case that people who object to the status quo as unreasonable or unjust in some respects will be on offense. They have to be. Otherwise, they ratify and extend the status quo. So isn't the real question not offense versus defense, but rather the content of the people who are urging change? And perhaps one side has been on the offense and the other on defense because there are a number of wrongs to be righted. Many evangelical Protestants, feel outraged that the drift of the country, as you describe it, towards same-sex marriage has culminated as it has as a matter of law. Does that make their desire to be, quote unquote, left alone defensible? So don't you have to dig a little deeper than offense and defense in order to describe what's really been going on in the past 2 generations?
So Peter, if you would hold just for one moment, you all, here's the predicament. We want to keep you on time. We have 6.5 minutes left. Kate, can you, so unfair of me, could you give voice to your comment or question in 60 seconds or less? Peter may or may not address it, but we will have heard it. Kate, tell us who you are. Kate, you have a piece with us next week. Tell us what that piece is too. I just burnt 5 seconds of your time.
My name is Kate Epstein. I'm a history professor at Rutgers Camden. I have a piece coming out on the current history wars with American Purpose next week. And my question actually picks up, I think, on the last one. There was a ton in your essay that I agreed with and found compelling. The part that made me uncomfortable came sort of towards the end, and it was sort of the penultimate part. And it seemed to me you were treading towards suggesting that there was kind of a real America, which is the one that you see as playing defense, and then a sort of force that's trying to change America that's playing offense. And my own view as a historian is that the notion of a real America has always been deeply contested. And I guess my question boils down to, this question of offense versus defense seems to me almost guaranteed to basically alienate one side or the other, as does the question of, who's more to blame. I've reached a point where I think, once both sides are over 40%, I don't really care anymore. I would just, like to focus on making things better. But so my question is how do you, with an essay like this, actually reach people on the left when the framing of the argument is pretty much guaranteed to alienate a chunk of them?
Yeah. Okay. All good questions. And in 3 or 4 minutes, I'll try to address them. First to Bill. Yes, for sure. Greater focus is fine. I think I had already said in my remarks that I recognize the benefits that would come to the State Department of drawing on a greater diversity of Americans. And I think we agreed also that the office, at least as I described it, is likely to heighten tensions and not succeed as we hope. On the question of, and this was the last question as well, offense and defense, control and not being controlled. Yes, I agree with Bill that I need to dig deeper. Only have a short time on this this conversation. There's much more to be said, but I'll just offer this observation. Yes, there's a permanent tension with liberal democracy between those who are especially interested in change, reform, and those who are interested in preserving what is inherited, some of which is genuinely good. But the comparison to 1950 actually is instructive. It does seem to me that we've traveled a tremendous distance since the 1950s. And Bill even suggested, you know, sometimes the people who are on offense, they're more, there's more justice on their side, but sometimes not. And so, yes, for sure. Let's, I think we can agree to engage in a case-by-case analysis, whether this dictate from on high for above, this rule that presumes to govern the entire United States is one, consistent with our constitutional fundamentals and would be good for the country as a whole, or whether it's a matter that is best left to states and local communities. But of course, I'm entirely committed to the view that it's the federal government's job to ultimately guarantee fundamental rights. Finally, you know, the essay, thank you for having taken a look at it, you know, to a significant extent follows the argument in this book by Gadi Taube. It will be called in English Anti-Democratic Liberalism. And I will simply say here, because we don't have time to dig deeper, that in the penultimate part, part 4, I try to push back strongly against Gadi, who suggested a sharp division between the nationalists and those who are devoted to Lockean principles, which I believe are sewn into the American experiment, to suggest that the only forms of nationalism that we should be defending, the expressions of nationalism that we should be defending, are the ones consistent with the basic requirements of individual freedom, human equality. It seems to me that a liberal framework, a largely liberal framework, which creates a great deal of room for democracy, allows for the expression of specific cultural symbols, for the choice of a national language, for people's control over borders. But in a proper liberal democracy, the kind that I think the United States must strive to be and must reform it to achieve that, the rights of minorities are always protected. And just as a final comment, if I suggested that one group represents the true America, true Americans, another group was un-American, this was a mistake. It was unintended. What I do want to say, and I keep insisting on this, is the best part of the United States is bound up with our fundamental principles and the best of our constitutional traditions, and that we need a more progressive party focusing on change and improvement, and a more conservative party that's interested in the claims of order and the best in us. And here I'm, of course, not saying anything novel that a variety of thinkers, including Mill, have said. And long live a healthy, productive competition between them, provided that competition takes place on the basis of a commitment to those fundamental principles.
So with that, and watching the clock, so to Hal and others, I wasn't able to get you in. Apologies next time, by all means. To everybody who spent precious, valuable time this last hour, we're deeply grateful. Peter, what a pleasure, stimulating, challenging, in my view, constructive this last hour. So thank you, Peter Berkowitz, very much. To everybody, if your camera is off and you're inclined, feel free to turn it on just for a moment. As I say, it's kind of nice to say hi, bye in these times of virtual connection. So hi and good afternoon, good evening to those who joined us for Europe. And Peter Berkowitz, again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.